The afternoon sun filtered through the smudged windows of Sweetie's bakery as Diane Miller stood at the counter, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, but I need to cancel the birthday cake order for Saturday." Her fingers trembled as she clutched her purse, knuckles whitening with the effort of holding herself together. The bakery, with its warm scents of vanilla and cinnamon, had always been a place of joy for Diane, but today it felt like the sight of another defeat. Cancel? "But Ms. Miller, we've already started on the baseball design. Tommy's turning 8, right?" Nancy, the bakery owner, peered over her reading glasses with concern. She had known Diane since high school and had watched her struggle as a single mother since Tommy's father walked out 3 years ago. "I know, and I'm so sorry. Something came up with work and I just—" Diane's voice cracked. She couldn't bring herself to say that her hours had been cut at the hospital where she worked as a nurse's aide, or that the choice had come down to the cake or the electricity bill. "I'll still pay the deposit. I know it's short notice." What neither woman noticed was the tall man in the corner booth, his attention caught by the quiet exchange. James Harrington had stopped at the small-town bakery on a whim, while his driver filled up the car at the gas station across the street. Dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, he seemed out of place among the gingham curtains and faded linoleum. The tech billionaire was passing through on his way to a conference, his mind usually occupied with stock prices and acquisition deals. But something about the woman's posture, shoulders rounded forward as if bearing an invisible weight, made him listen more carefully. "Don't worry about the deposit, honey," Nancy said, reaching across the counter to squeeze Diane's hand. "You can use it another time. Is Tommy very disappointed?" "He doesn't know yet," Diane whispered, wiping quickly at her eyes. "I'll figure something out. Maybe cupcakes from the grocery store. I just hate to let him down again." James watched as she left the bakery, her head held high despite the obvious distress. Through the window, he saw her climb into an aging sedan, sit motionless for a moment, then rest her forehead against the steering wheel. "Tough situation?" James asked casually as Nancy approached to refill his coffee. "Oh, you have no idea," Nancy sighed, glancing toward the door. "Diane works harder than anyone I know. 2 jobs, raising that sweet boy alone. Tommy's been talking about this birthday party for months. Baseball theme. He's crazy about it. Keeps saying this is the year the Red Sox scouts will discover him," she added with a sad smile. "Diane's been saving up, but life keeps throwing curveballs." James nodded, his coffee forgotten as he gazed out the window. At 42, he had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. His charitable foundation donated millions each year, but it had been ages since he'd connected with the human impact of financial struggle. The foundation staff handled the details. He just signed the checks. "What kind of cake was it going to be?" he asked suddenly. "Baseball field design. Green frosting for the grass, white for the bases. Tommy's name on the pitcher's mound." Nancy's eyes brightened. "I was going to make little fondant players too. That boy deserves something special." James pulled out his wallet. "I'd like to pay for the cake and whatever else would make a great party." Nancy stared at him, recognition slowly dawning. "You're just someone who remembers what it's like to look forward to a birthday," he interrupted with a gentle smile. "My mother worked 3 jobs. There were years when a cake was a luxury we couldn't afford." Within minutes, the plan expanded. Not just the cake, but a complete party at the local baseball field. James made calls while Nancy contacted Diane's best friend Kelly to coordinate. By the time he left the bakery, James had set aside his conference plans for the weekend. Something about this situation had stirred memories he'd long buried beneath spreadsheets and board meetings. 3 days later, Tommy Miller woke up on his 8th birthday, expecting little more than his mother's traditional pancake breakfast. The past few months had been full of disappointments. Baseball camp cancelled, their planned move to a better apartment delayed, his mother's increasingly exhausted smiles. He'd overheard enough to understand that money was tight, though the concept remained abstract to his young mind. "Ready for your birthday surprise?" Diane asked, her eyes sparkling in a way Tommy hadn't seen in months. "Pancakes?" he guessed, already grateful for the small tradition. "Better." "Get dressed, baseball gear today." Tommy's heart raced as they drove toward the town's baseball field. He spotted balloons tied to the fence and a small gathering of people. "Mom, what's happening?" Diane simply smiled, emotion making it impossible to speak. When they parked, Tommy recognized his friends from school, his little league teammates, and several adults from the neighborhood. "Surprise!" they shouted as he approached. The baseball field had been transformed. Her tent housed a table laden with food and drinks. Baseball-themed decorations hung everywhere. Tommy's friends rushed forward, baseball mitts already on their hands. "We're having your party at a real baseball field," Diane explained, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. Someone very kind wanted to make your birthday special." Tommy was speechless, his eyes wide as he took in the scene, especially the magnificent cake centerpiece, exactly like the one he'd described to his mother months ago while flipping through Nancy's cake catalogue. What Tommy didn't immediately notice was the tall man standing off to the side, watching with an unexpected lump in his throat. James Harrington had spent billions on business deals without blinking, but the pure joy on this child's face affected him in ways he couldn't articulate. The day unfolded with impromptu baseball games, presents, and food. Local coaches volunteered to run drills with the kids. A professional photographer captured moments that would become cherished memories. Through it all, James remained in the background, speaking briefly with Diane to explain his impulse at the bakery. "I can't possibly thank you enough," Diane said, watching Tommy run the bases with abandon, his face flushed with excitement. "You don't need to," James replied simply. "Sometimes life deals unfair hands. I've been fortunate enough to receive more than my share of good cards. It's only right to redistribute the deck occasionally." As the afternoon light began to fade and children reluctantly headed home, Tommy approached James, whom he'd been eyeing curiously throughout the day. "Mom says you're the reason we had this amazing party," Tommy said, looking up at the billionaire with unabashed directness. "She says you're like a baseball scout, but for people who need help." James crouched down to meet the boy at eye level. "Your mom is the real hero. I just pitched in for one day. She's batting for you every single day." Tommy considered this with the seriousness only an 8-year-old can muster. Then, with the unpredictable impulse of childhood, he threw his arms around the billionaire's neck in a fierce hug. "This was the best day ever," he whispered. James froze, then carefully returned the embrace, something shifting in his chest, a wall crumbling that he hadn't even realized he'd built. As the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, none of them could have predicted how this chance encounter would change all their lives. The story was just beginning. The Monday following Tommy's birthday celebration, James Harrington sat in his executive suite overlooking the Boston skyline, unable to focus on the quarterly reports his assistant had prepared. His mind kept drifting back to the baseball field, to Tommy's uninhibited joy and Diane's grateful tears. Something had awakened in him, a recognition of purpose beyond profit margins and technological innovations. "Mr. Harrington," his assistant Patricia appeared at the door. "Your 10 o'clock was cancelled, but there's something else that needs your attention." James nodded absently, still staring out the window. "Sir, are you all right? You've been distracted since you returned from your trip." James turned, regarding his efficient assistant of 7 years. Had he ever asked about her family, her aspirations beyond managing his calendar? "Patricia, do we have any programs that directly help working families? Not just donations to large charities, but something more personal?" Patricia blinked in surprise. "The foundation handles our philanthropic work, but it's mostly large grants to established organizations, nothing specifically targeting individual families that I'm aware of." "Let's change that," James said decisively. "Set up a meeting with the foundation team and find out if we have contacts at Mercy Hospital in Riverdale." "Riverdale? That's nearly 2 hours from Boston. I'm aware. It's important." What James couldn't explain, even to himself, was the persistent image of Diane's determined face as she'd tried to cancel that cake. There had been no self-pity, just quiet dignity in the face of impossible choices. It reminded him of his own mother, who had cleaned houses and waited tables to provide for him after his father's death, never complaining despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. Meanwhile, in Riverdale, Diane was experiencing her own lingering effects from the birthday party. Tommy couldn't stop talking about Mr. James and the amazing day. His enthusiasm was infectious, but it also stirred uncomfortable feelings. While deeply grateful for the stranger's kindness, Diane prided herself on self-reliance. Accepting such generosity from a billionaire, however well-intentioned, had left her feeling both grateful and somewhat diminished. "Mum," Can we send Mr. James a thank you card? I made this in art class. Tommy held up a construction paper creation covered in glitter and baseball stickers. Diane smiled, ruffling his hair. That's thoughtful, honey, but I'm not sure how to reach him, Ms. Nancy at the bakery might know. She talked to him a lot. The suggestion was reasonable, but Diane hesitated. The bakery had become a place of mixed emotions, the site of her humiliation and subsequent rescue. Later that week, Diane's supervisor at the hospital called her into the office. With her stomach in knots, Diane prepared for more bad news about reduced hours. "Diane, I've received a rather unusual request," Dr. Winters began, her expression unreadable. "The Harrington Foundation has approached the hospital about establishing a new nursing scholarship program. They specifically asked if we had staff interested in advancing their medical education." Diane stared blankly. "That's wonderful for the hospital, but the foundation representative mentioned you by name." The room seemed to tilt. "Me? There must be some mistake." "No mistake. Apparently, Mr. Harrington himself requested that you be informed of this opportunity, Doctor." Winters slid a folder across the desk. "Full tuition for an RN program, plus a stipend for living expenses. They're calling it the Second Chance Scholarship." Diane's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside was an official letter from the Harrington Foundation, along with program details that seemed tailored specifically to her situation, classes scheduled around her existing work hours, childcare assistance, mentoring support. The generosity was overwhelming, but also discomforting. Why her? I don't know what to say. "Say you'll apply," Dr. Winters encouraged. "You're one of our hardest workers, Diane. You deserve this chance." That evening, as Tommy completed his homework at the kitchen table of their small apartment, Diane paced, the scholarship papers spread before her. "What's wrong, Mom? You keep walking back and forth like Mrs. Peterson's cat when it's hungry." Diane smiled despite her turmoil. "Just thinking, buddy. About the papers. Is it bills again?" His young face grew serious, displaying an awareness no 8-year-old should have about financial struggles. "No, actually. It's something good, potentially, but complicated." Tommy nodded sagely. "Like when Coach says I have great potential but complicated mechanics." Diane laughed, the tension breaking momentarily. "Something like that." The next day, she found herself standing once again in Sweetie's bakery, this time with purpose rather than defeat. "Nancy, I need to ask you something about Mr. Harrington." Nancy smiled knowingly. "I was wondering when you'd come by. That man was quite taken with you and Tommy." Diane blushed. "Not like that. He's established a scholarship at the hospital, and somehow my name was specifically mentioned. It feels, I don't know, targeted. I'm grateful but also confused." Nancy wiped her hands on her apron. "He asked a lot of questions about you after you left that day. Not in a creepy way," she added hastily. "He seemed genuinely concerned, said something about seeing his own mother in you." "His mother?" "Apparently she raised him alone, worked multiple jobs. He said watching you reminded him of what she went through." This revelation shifted something in Diane's perspective. Not charity then, but empathy born of shared experience, despite the vast difference in their current circumstances. As Diane debated the scholarship offer over the following days, James was implementing broader changes inspired by his encounter with the Millers. The Harrington Foundation launched a new initiative focused on supporting working single parents, particularly those pursuing education in healthcare fields. The pilot program would begin in Riverdale before expanding nationally. 2 weeks after Tommy's birthday, Diane was startled by a knock at her apartment door. Opening it revealed Nancy from the bakery, holding a large envelope. "Special delivery," Nancy announced with a conspiratorial smile. "Someone dropped this off for you." Inside was a brief note on expensive stationery. "Mrs. Miller, I hope you'll consider the scholarship opportunity. It's not charity, it's investment in someone who clearly has the determination and heart that our healthcare system desperately needs. No strings attached, no obligations. Your decision entirely." Separately, Tommy left quite an impression on me. "Enclosed is a season pass for the Red Sox home games. My driver can arrange transportation for any games you wish to attend. Again, no obligations, simply an opportunity if you choose to accept it. With respect and admiration, James Harrington P.S. The baseball scout joke was the best I've heard in years. Diane sat heavily on the sofa, the note in one hand and the season tickets, which must have cost thousands, in the other. "Well," Nancy prompted, "he's either the most generous man alive or what?" Diane shook her head. "I don't know. Why us? There are thousands of struggling families. What makes us special?" Nancy considered this. "Maybe you're not special. No offense. Maybe you're just the one he happened to see. Sometimes being seen is enough." That night after Tommy went to bed, Diane made her decision. She would accept the scholarship but decline the baseball tickets. Education was an investment in their future. The tickets felt too personal, too much like... She couldn't articulate what exactly, but something that crossed a boundary she wasn't comfortable breaching. She crafted a careful email to the foundation, accepting the scholarship with profound thanks, explaining her decision about the tickets, and attaching a photo of Tommy's thank you card. The response came within minutes, despite the late hour. "The scholarship is yours. Congratulations. As for the tickets, I understand your hesitation, but please reconsider. Not for yourself, but for Tommy. I grew up without such opportunities, and would have given anything for such experiences with my mother. The driver is professional and trustworthy. Perhaps one game as a trial, no ulterior motives, I assure you." Diane stared at her phone screen, conflicted emotions swirling. What exactly was happening here? Was this simply the whim of a bored billionaire or something more meaningful? And why did the distinction matter so much to her? The crack of the bat echoed through Fenway Park as the Red Sox slugger sent the ball soaring toward the green monster. Tommy leapt to his feet, nearly spilling his soda, his face alight with unbridled excitement. "Mom, did you see that? 3-run homer!" He turned to Diane, his eyes wide with wonder. "These seats are amazing. We can see everything." Diane nodded, smiling despite herself. After 3 weeks of polite refusal, she had finally relented to Tommy's pleas and James's persistent offers. Now, sitting in premium box seats behind home plate, seats that would have cost more than a month's rent, she had to admit the experience was magical. "Mr. Paterson at school won't believe I was this close," Tommy exclaimed, clutching his new Red Sox cap, a purchase Diane had allowed as a special treat. "Can we take a picture to show him?" As Diane raised her phone to capture Tommy's beaming face with the field behind him, a discreet cough from their left caught her attention. "Excuse me," said an elegant older woman in a Red Sox jacket. "Would you like me to take a photo of both of you together?" "That would be wonderful, thank you," Diane replied, handing over her phone. The woman snapped several pictures, then returned the device with a warm smile. "Your son is having quite the time. First baseball game." "First professional game," Tommy answered before Diane could speak. "We're here because Mr. James gave us tickets. He's a billionaire who helped when Mum had to cancel my birthday cake, and now Mum's going to be a real nurse because of his scholarship." Diane flushed with embarrassment at Tommy's artless explanation of their circumstances. "Tommy, honey, we don't need to share our personal business." The woman's eyes crinkled with amusement. "No need for embarrassment. James has always had a good eye for recognizing worthy investments." Diane's attention sharpened. "You know Mr. Harrington? Know him?" "I raised him." The woman extended her hand. "Eleanor Harrington, James's mother." Diane nearly choked on her breath. "Mrs. Harrington, I had no idea you would be here." Eleanor waved dismissively. "James doesn't know either. I keep a season ticket in the next section over. Been coming to Sox games for 40 years through thick and thin. When James mentioned he'd given tickets to a nursing student and her baseball-loving son, I was curious." She winked at Tommy. "Wanted to see who caught my son's attention." Tommy, oblivious to the undertones of the conversation, launched into an enthusiastic recounting of his birthday party. Eleanor listened with genuine interest, her shrewd eyes occasionally darting to Diane's increasingly uncomfortable expression. When Tommy dashed off to buy a foam finger from a passing vendor, with carefully counted money from his own allowance, Eleanor turned to Diane. "He's overstepping, isn't he, my son?" Diane hesitated. "I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunities Mr. Harrington has provided. The scholarship will change our lives." "But," Eleanor prompted, "but I can't help wondering why us? Why me? It feels personal, in a way that makes me uneasy." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "James lost his father when he was 6. I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. No time for baseball games then," she added with a touch of sadness. "He built his empire from nothing. But success came at a cost. He's brilliant with technology, hopeless with people, especially since the divorce. Diane hadn't known he was divorced. The revelation somehow made him more human, less the infallible benefactor. When he called me about your situation, it was the first time in years I'd heard genuine emotion in his voice, Eleanor continued. Whatever his reasons, they're sincere. But, she fixed Diane with a penetrating look, you're right to maintain boundaries. Kindness shouldn't create obligation. Before Diane could respond, Tommy returned, proudly sporting his new foam finger. The conversation shifted back to baseball, but Eleanor's words lingered in Diane's mind throughout the evening. After the game, a thrilling Red Sox victory, they were escorted to a waiting car by James's personal driver, Robert, a grandfatherly man who had charmed Tommy with baseball trivia during their drive to Fenway. "Did you enjoy the game, young man?" Robert asked as he held the car door open. "Best day ever," Tommy declared. Then, with childish directness, "Is Mr. James coming to see us?" Robert glanced briefly at Diane. "Mr. Harrington is currently in California on business." "Oh." Tommy's disappointment was palpable. "I wanted to thank him and tell him about the home run." "I'm sure he would like to hear about it," Robert replied diplomatically. "Perhaps you could write him a letter." The suggestion brightened Tommy's mood, and he spent the ride home planning what he would write. Diane remained quiet, processing the unexpected meeting with Eleanor and the complex emotions it had stirred. Later that week, Diane began her first classes in the nursing program. The rigorous schedule, combined with her continued work at the hospital, left little time for overthinking the Harrington situation. She threw herself into her studies with determination, grateful for the opportunity regardless of its unusual origins. Nearly a month passed without any direct contact from James, though the foundation staff checked in regularly to ensure the scholarship program was meeting her needs. Tommy faithfully sent handwritten letters after each Red Sox game they attended, addressing them to Mr. James at the foundation offices. Whether they reached him, Diane couldn't say. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Diane entered the hospital break room to find her co-workers gathered around the television, expressions rapt. "What's going on?" she asked, setting down her lunch bag. "Harrington's new healthcare initiative," answered Dr. Winters, gesturing to the screen where James was conducting a press conference. "He's just pledged $50 million to improve rural and underserved hospitals nationwide." Diane moved closer to the television, studying the man who had so dramatically altered her family's trajectory. On screen, James appeared every inch the polished tech mogul, articulate and confident. Yet Diane noticed something his other audience might miss, a subtle tension in his shoulders, a hint of discomfort behind his media-trained smile. The Harrington Second Chance Initiative will focus on both infrastructure improvements and personnel development, James was explaining. "We've already piloted a nursing scholarship program that's showing promising results." A reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Harrington, this represents a significant shift in your foundation's focus." What inspired this change? For a brief moment, James's composure faltered. Sometimes we need reminders of what truly matters. Healthcare isn't just about technology. It's about people. People who make hard choices, who sacrifice daily to care for others. His gaze seemed to look beyond the press corps, as if seeing something or someone else entirely. "This initiative honors my mother, who worked as a hospital aide while raising me, and every parent who has ever stood at a counter making impossible choices between necessities and small joys." Diane felt her cheeks warm as several co-workers turned toward her, the connection suddenly obvious to those who knew her story. "He's talking about you," whispered Nancy from radiology. "You're the inspiration for a $50 million initiative." Overwhelmed, Diane slipped out of the break room, seeking refuge in a quiet corridor. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I hope I didn't overstep by mentioning the scholarship program. Your privacy remains paramount. J.H." How had he gotten her number? The foundation paperwork, of course. Diane hesitated before responding. "The initiative sounds wonderful. Many families will benefit. Tommy and I enjoyed the Red Sox games, especially meeting your mother." The response came immediately. "My mother. Eleanor was there." She introduced herself. "Lovely woman." There was a longer pause before, "She's always been my best advisor and worst meddler. I apologize if she said anything inappropriate." Diane smiled despite herself. "She said you're brilliant with technology, hopeless with people. Accurate assessment. May I call you? There's something I'd like to discuss regarding the foundation. Diane's thumb hovered over the phone. A boundary was being crossed, yet she found herself surprisingly comfortable with the shift. I'm at work until 6. After Tommy's bedtime at 8:30 would be best. That evening, after tucking in an exhausted Tommy, Diane sat at her small kitchen table, nervously awaiting James's call. When her phone rang precisely at 8:30, she took a deep breath before answering. Mrs. Miller, thank you for taking my call. It's Ms., and please call me Diane. Diane, then. I'm James, not Mr. Harrington, he replied, a smile evident in his voice. I wanted to discuss expanding the scholarship program based on your experience so far. Your feedback would be invaluable. For the next hour, they talked about the practical challenges of pursuing education while parenting alone. Diane found herself speaking candidly about childcare difficulties, scheduling conflicts, and the emotional toll of divided attention. James listened intently, asking thoughtful questions without the condescension she might have expected from someone in his position. You should be consulting with education experts, Diane said finally, not a nursing student who's only been in the program for a few weeks. Experts provide theory. You provide reality, James replied. That's far more valuable. Their conversation shifted gradually from the scholarship program to more personal topics. Tommy's baseball aspirations, James's latest tech project, books they'd both enjoyed. By the call's end, Diane realized with surprise that nearly 3 hours had passed, and that she had laughed more than she had in months. I'd like to continue this conversation, James said as they prepared to hang up. Perhaps in person, if you're comfortable with that. Purely professional, of course, he added hastily. The foundation could benefit enormously from your ongoing input. Diane hesitated, aware of crossing into unfamiliar territory. I'd be happy to help with the foundation, she said carefully, for Tommy's sake as much as others. Every child deserves a birthday cake. Autumn painted Riverdale in brilliant hues of red and gold, as September gave way to October. In the 6 months since Tommy's birthday, life had transformed for the Millers in ways Diane could never have imagined. Her nursing program was challenging but rewarding. Tommy was thriving in a new after-school program sponsored by the Harrington Foundation, and their financial situation, while still requiring careful management, no longer teetered on the edge of crisis. What had begun as a purely professional relationship with James Harrington had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Their first in-person meeting after the phone call, coffee at a quiet cafe to discuss scholarship program improvements, had led to dinner the following week to continue the conversation. That dinner had somehow turned into a regular occurrence, with James making the 2-hour drive from Boston whenever his schedule permitted. Mom, is Mr. James coming tonight? Tommy asked, looking up from his homework at the kitchen table. The question carried no judgment, just curiosity mingled with hope. Over the months, James had become a fixture in their lives, bringing a stability that had been missing since Tommy's father departed. Yes, he's joining us for dinner, Diane replied, checking the lasagna in the oven. He mentioned bringing those astronomy books you were talking about last time. Tommy's face lit up. Awesome! I need them for my science project. Do you think he'd help me build the solar system model too? You can ask him yourself, she answered, trying to keep her tone casual, despite the flutter in her stomach. These dinner visits had become the highlight of her week, a fact that both thrilled and terrified her. James arrived precisely at 6, carrying not only the promised astronomy books, but also a small telescope. The books explained the concepts, but nothing beats seeing the real thing, he explained, as Tommy launched himself into an enthusiastic greeting. Watching them interact, James patiently answering Tommy's rapid-fire questions about Jupiter's moons, Diane felt a complicated warmth spread through her chest. For a man who claimed to be hopeless with people, James had shown a remarkable gift for connecting with her son. There was no condescension, no performance in his attention, just genuine interest. Later, after Tommy had reluctantly gone to bed, extracting a promise from James to set up the telescope that weekend, Diane and James settled on the small balcony of her apartment, mugs of tea in hand. The Foundation Board approved all your suggested changes to the scholarship program, James said, his voice quiet in the evening stillness. The childcare stipend increase, the mentorship network, the emergency fund for unexpected expenses, everything. We're expanding to 5 more hospitals next month. Diane nodded, pride mingling with a touch of sadness. That's wonderful. Those changes will make such a difference. But, James prompted, attuned now to the nuances of her tone. She hesitated. I'm just realizing that as the program expands, you won't need my input as much. These dinners are conversations. They'll naturally come to an end. James set down his mug, turning to face her directly. Is that what you think this is? A consulting relationship? Isn't it? At least, that's how it started. Diane. His voice had a gentle intensity that made her meet his eyes. I drive 2 hours each way, multiple times a week, to see you and Tommy. I've rescheduled board meetings, delegated critical projects, and turned down speaking engagements worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, all to eat lasagna at your kitchen table and help an 8-year-old with his homework. Her breath caught. Why? Because this, he gestured between them, is the first real thing I've felt in years, maybe ever. The silence between them hummed with possibility, with unspoken fears and hopes. Diane had been hurt before, had learned the hard way that fairy tales rarely came true for single mothers working paycheck to paycheck. Yet here was James Harrington, billionaire, tech genius, increasingly the man she thought about first thing each morning, saying words she'd stopped believing she would ever hear again. I'm scared, she admitted finally. Not just for me, but for Tommy. He's already so attached to you. If this doesn't work, I understand the stakes, James said softly. I've never been a father figure before, never wanted to be truthfully until I met Tommy, until I met you. Their conversation was interrupted by Diane's phone ringing, the hospital calling her in for an emergency shift. Reality reasserting itself, as it always did. As James prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Think about what I said? We can take this as slowly as you need. Diane nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the possibilities stretching before her. I will. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity. Midterm exams consumed Diane's study time, while James faced a crisis at his company that required his presence in California. They spoke daily by phone, but 2 weeks passed without seeing each other in person, the longest separation since their dinners had begun. Tommy grew increasingly worried as the days passed without a visit from Mr. James. Is he not coming back? He asked one evening, his voice small. Dad said he'd come back too, but he didn't. The question pierced Diane's heart. This is different, honey. James is just very busy with work right now. He called yesterday, remember? Asked all about your science project. Tommy nodded, unconvinced. But what if he forgets about us? He has a big important company and fancy cars and probably lots of friends who are rich like him. The child's insecurity mirrored her own unspoken fears. What place could she and Tommy possibly have in James Harrington's world? Despite his assurances, despite the genuine connection they'd formed, the gulf between their lives remained vast. That weekend, as Diane helped Tommy with his solar system model, her phone chimed with a text from James. Emergency resolved back in Boston. May I see you both tomorrow? I've missed you more than I can say. Just as she was about to reply, there was a knock at the apartment door. Opening it revealed Eleanor Harrington, James's mother, holding a bakery box from Sweeties. Eleanor, this is unexpected, Diane said, recovering from her surprise. Good unexpected, I hope, the older woman replied with a smile. Nancy mentioned you'd been working double shifts this week. Thought you and Tommy might appreciate some of her cinnamon rolls. Diane welcomed her in, introducing Tommy, who was initially shy but quickly warmed up when Eleanor showed interest in his half-completed solar system. James was obsessed with space at your age, Eleanor told him. Built a rocket in our backyard when he was 10. Nearly set the neighbor's tree on fire during the launch. Tommy giggled, delighted by this glimpse of his hero's childhood mishaps. While Tommy returned to painting his planets, Eleanor turned to Diane with characteristic directness. He's miserable without you, you know. Diane busied herself with making coffee. We've both been busy. His company needed him in California. The company always needs him. That's the excuse he's used for years to avoid real connection. Eleanor accepted the coffee mug with a nod of thanks. What you may not realize is that this is the first time he's ever resented work, keeping him from someone. Diane didn't know how to respond. Her feelings for James had deepened into something profound, something she hadn't dared name even to herself. Eleanor continued, her voice softening. When my husband died, I thought I'd never find love again. Too busy, too many responsibilities, too many risks. It took me 12 years to realize those were excuses born of fear. And did you? Find love again. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. Robert and I have been married for 26 years now. Robert? Your driver, Robert? James's driver now. My husband. Eleanor laughed at Diane's expression. Life offers second chances in the most unexpected packages. The question is whether we're brave enough to accept them. After Eleanor left, Diane sat on the balcony long into the evening, contemplating second chances and unexpected packages. When her phone rang just after 9, she wasn't surprised to see James's name. "I'm back," he said without preamble. "Mother mentioned she visited you today. I hope she behaved herself." Diane smiled. She brought cinnamon rolls and embarrassing childhood stories. Tommy was thrilled. "And you, were you thrilled to hear about my pyrotechnic failures? I was glad to know you weren't always perfect." There was a pause. "I've never been perfect, Diane, but these past months with you and Tommy, I've been better, happier, more myself than I've ever been." The vulnerability in his voice gave her courage. "We've missed you, both of us." "I've been thinking," James said carefully. "The foundation is opening a new office in Riverdale to manage the expanding scholarship program. It would make sense for me to spend more time there, to be closer to the project." "The project," Diane repeated, a smile in her voice. "And to you," he admitted, "if that's what you want too." 6 months after a cancelled birthday cake had brought them together, James and Diane sat side by side on bleachers at Tommy's baseball field, watching him practice with his team. The evening was cool, autumn giving way to winter's approach. "He's getting better," James observed as Tommy connected with the ball, sending it sailing over second base. "The coaching helps, and the practice field you funded for the league." James shrugged off her gratitude as he always did. "Small investment, significant returns. The Harrington way." Diane turned to study his profile in the fading light. "Is that how you see us? An investment?" He met her gaze, his expression serious. "The best I've ever made, but not in the way you mean." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "You and Tommy showed me what I'd been missing while building my empire. Purpose, connection, joy in simple things." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Tommy run bases with his teammates. The past 6 months had brought challenges as they navigated their evolving relationship, balancing Diane's fierce independence with James's instinct to solve problems with money, integrating their vastly different worlds, building Tommy's trust that this new family configuration would last. "I have something for you," James said suddenly, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Not what you might think," he added quickly, noting her expression. "That conversation is for later when you're ready." He handed her an envelope. Inside, Diane found the deed to a modest house a few blocks from her apartment, close to Tommy's school, the hospital, and the park where he played baseball. "James, I can't accept this." "It's not a gift," he corrected gently. "It's an investment property owned by the foundation, designated as housing for scholarship recipients. You'd be the program administrator, living on site to mentor future students, salary commensurate with the position, of course." Diane narrowed her eyes. "You created an entire housing program just to give me a house without making me feel like a charity case." James had the grace to look slightly abashed. "The program is legitimate. We've been planning it for months. Your advisorship has been invaluable." "And the house just happens to have 3 bedrooms, a home office, and a backyard perfect for a telescope?" "Functional requirements for the program administrator," he replied with mock seriousness before his expression softened. "I want to give you and Tommy the world, Diane, but I'm learning that what matters most is being part of that world with you, however you'll have me." As Tommy jogged toward them, face flushed with exercise and happiness, Diane made her decision. The path forward wasn't without complications, but some journeys were worth every challenging step. "We accept," she said, squeezing James's hand, "the position and everything that comes with it." Tommy reached them, breathless with excitement. "Did you see my hit? Coach says I have a natural swing." "We saw," James confirmed, making room on the bench between them. "Outstanding form." As Tommy launched into a detailed analysis of his performance, James caught Diane's eye over the boy's head. The look that passed between them held a promise. A family formed not by blood but by choice, of second chances embraced, of a future brighter than either could have imagined that day in Sweetie's bakery when a cancelled cake had changed everything.
Black man is arrested, but when the police discover who he is, they are shocked. In the comfort of his home, Thierry Dupont, a respected judge, was with his 10-year-old son, Lucas. The calm of the night was interrupted by a loud knock at the door. "Stay here, son," Thierry said, standing up with a dark premonition. Opening the door, he was greeted by officers led by Captain Pierre Dubois. "Thierry Dupont, you are under arrest for corruption and conspiracy," Dubois announced. Thierry's eyes widened in surprise and indignation. "This is a mistake," he replied. "I have the right to know what I'm being accused of." Before he could react, the police handcuffed him in front of Lucas, who now stood at the door, eyes filled with tears. "Dad, what's happening?" the boy asked, voice trembling. Thierry smiled faintly. "Everything will be all right, Lucas." "Trust me," he said as he was led away. As Thierry was taken away, Pauline Martin, an investigative journalist, watched the scene with interest. She was in the middle of an investigation into police and political corruption. With a keen instinct for news, she began recording the arrest with her phone. In a luxurious office, corrupt businessman Antoine Leblanc smiled at the news of Thierry's arrest. He knew Thierry, a strict judge, was an obstacle to his corrupt plans. Framing him was the only way to ensure the continuation of his illicit businesses. Captain Dubois, convinced of Thierry's guilt, led the operation firmly. However, seeing Thierry's genuine reaction, a doubt began to arise. His eyes flickered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. Inside the patrol car, a young officer named Jacques looked at Thierry with admiration. "He is Judge Dupont," he murmured. "The man who fought against corruption for years. How could he be involved in this?" His more experienced colleague shook his head. Nothing is what it seemed," he replied. But the doubt was planted. Soon after Thierry's arrest, headlines dominated the newspapers and news channels. "A corrupt judge exposed," blared the front page of one of the country's biggest newspapers. In front of the police station, a crowd of journalists awaited. When Thierry was led out of the police car, camera flashes momentarily blinded him. He tried to keep his head up, but the shame and despair were evident in his eyes. Reporters shouted questions. "How do you feel being a traitor to your own system? Do you deny all the charges?" Thierry remained silent, knowing any word could be twisted. The crowd murmured, some pointing accusing fingers. The public humiliation was crushing. Being a black man in a position of power increased the hostility and prejudice in media and public reactions. He felt the weight of judging eyes, each camera flash a direct blow to his dignity. Pauline Martin began to dig deeper. The speed at which evidence surfaced against Thierry raised suspicions. In her small office, Pauline typed frantically, cross-referencing information and revisiting reliable sources. She knew something was not right. The next morning, her article was published. Framed Judge, Hoax or Truth? In it, Pauline questioned the validity of the charges and suggested Thierry might be a victim of a conspiracy. The article quickly spread on social media, generating heated debates and dividing opinions. Pauline's courage brought hope to those who believed in Thierry's innocence. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing, with people offering support and others making veiled threats. While Thierry faced public shame, Antoine Leblanc was at a lavish event, surrounded by influential politicians and businessmen. "Hey, we did it, gentlemen," Antoine said with a confident smile. "Thierry Dupont is out of our way. Now we can continue our business without interference." The others toasted in response, laughing and exchanging complicit glances. Antoine knew the battle was far from over, but that moment of triumph was sweet. He was confident he had taken every precaution to ensure Thierry wouldn't recover easily. Meanwhile, Lucas's life turned into a nightmare. At school, he was the target of cruel jokes and relentless bullying. "Your father is a criminal," one of the boys shouted, pushing Lucas against a locker. "Are you just like him?" another mocked. Teachers tried to intervene, but the situation was out of control. Lucas felt alone and helpless. The laughter and insults echoed in his mind, and he avoided eye contact with anyone. Each day at school was torture, and he wondered if life would ever return to normal. Racial prejudice exacerbated Lucas's suffering, making him feel even more isolated. He began to have nightmares and lose interest in things he once loved, the emotional pressure crushing him daily. Marie Durand, Thierry's friend and defense attorney, began investigating the evidence. In her office, Piles of documents and reports were scattered around. Marie analyzed every detail, looking for inconsistencies. Talking to witnesses and revisiting evidence, Marie found details that didn't fit. Contradictory testimonies and planted evidence began to emerge. With each new discovery, her determination grew. She knew proving Thierry's innocence would be a monumental task, but she was willing to go to the end. The pressure was intense, but friendship and justice gave Marie the strength she needed to continue. She spent sleepless nights reviewing every line of testimony and every piece of collected evidence. On the morning of the trial, the courtroom was packed. The buzz of conversations echoed off the walls. Thierry sat next to his lawyer, Marie Durand, watching every move in the courtroom closely. When the judge entered, silence fell instantly. Thierry could feel his heart pounding in his chest, as if he was facing a silent battle. Marie stood up with determination. "Your Honor, I would like to present a series of inconsistencies in the evidence against my client, Thierry Dupont," she began, handing documents to the judge. "The prosecution's witnesses have contradictory testimonies, and some evidence was clearly tampered with." She highlighted each point with precision, her voice clear and firm, as tension in the courtroom mounted. The judge's eyes, though attentive, revealed a disturbing impassivity. Pauline Martin continued her parallel investigation. One rainy afternoon, she received a phone call from an anonymous source. "I have something that might interest you about Judge Dupont's case," said the voice on the other end. Pauline met the source in a discreet cafe. The man, nervous, handed her an envelope. Back at her office, Pauline opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were documents showing suspicious bank transfers and intercepted conversations indicating a conspiracy to frame Thierry. Pauline knew this information could be key to Thierry's defense. She immediately contacted Marie to share the discovery. Her heart was racing, excitement mixed with a sense of urgency. Antoine Leblanc, increasingly nervous, called Julien Lefebvre, his accomplice, for a private meeting. "Julien, we must keep our story at all costs," Antoine said, his voice low and threatening. "If Thierry proves his innocence, we're finished." Julien, visibly uncomfortable, nodded. "I know, Antoine, but things are getting complicated." Marie is relentless, and Pauline found something. "I'm afraid everything will fall apart." Antoine grabbed Julien by the collar. "Then do whatever it takes to ensure it doesn't fall apart. Do you understand?" Julien swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the threat hanging over him. As pressure mounted, Captain Pierre Dubois began to question Thierry's guilt. At his desk, he reviewed reports and evidence again. Marie's dedication to highlighting inconsistencies and Pauline's courage in investigating beyond the surface planted seeds of doubt in his mind. Dubois, known for his sense of justice, couldn't ignore the signs of manipulation that began to emerge. He found himself reflecting on his actions and the speed with which he had accepted the evidence against Thierry. Am I making a mistake?" he thought, as the weight of his responsibilities pressed harder on his shoulders. Dubois' internal struggle became increasingly evident, his usually stern face now marked by worry lines. With each new discovery, his belief in the integrity of the investigations was shaken. In court, after Marie's presentation of inconsistencies, the prosecutor approached Thierry with a proposal. "If you accept a guilty plea, we can significantly reduce your sentence," he said, trying to appear reasonable. Thierry looked directly into the prosecutor's eyes, his determination unwavering. "I will not admit to something I didn't do. I'd rather fight for the truth," Thierry responded, his voice firm and full of conviction. Thierry's refusal to accept the deal only increased the tension in the courtroom. People murmured, surprised by his courage. The judge watched everything closely, his expression hard to decipher. Marie felt a chill as she realized the judicial system might be compromised. The judge's gaze sometimes seemed to avoid direct contact with her. Every movement and expression in the courtroom heightened the sense that larger forces were at play. Within the cold, damp walls of the prison, Thierry Dupont struggled to maintain his composure. News of his arrest had spread quickly among the inmates, many of whom he had personally sentenced. However, the situation worsened when Antoine Leblanc bribed guards and inmates to ensure Thierry was constantly targeted for assaults. One dark night, as Thierry tried to rest, he was awakened by the sound of heavy footsteps. Three inmates, accompanied by a corrupt guard, invaded his cell. "Time for payback, Judge," one of them growled. Thierry tried to defend himself, but the blows were swift and relentless. Each punch and kick was accompanied by insults and threats. The metallic smell of blood filled the air, and the searing pain in his body made each second feel like an eternity. While Thierry faced hell in prison, his son Lucas lived his own nightmare. Due to his father's situation and the lack of an immediate guardian, social services temporarily placed him in foster care. Lucas watched helplessly as he was separated from everything he knew, feeling abandoned and lost. In the new home, Lucas could barely sleep. The voices and laughter of the other foster children seemed distant and unreal. He constantly wondered when he could go home, to his father's arms. Each passing day increased the feeling of isolation and sadness, as if a part of his soul was being torn away. The room he was given felt cold and impersonal, and every object around him seemed to reinforce the distance between him and his previous life. Pauline Martin, determined to uncover the truth, intensified her investigations. The new material she had obtained revealed even more inconsistencies in the case against Thierry. Determined to make a difference, she wrote a more aggressive and revealing article. "A Conspiracy Against Justice, the Thierry Dupont Case," was the title of the article that shook public opinion. In it, Pauline detailed all the new discoveries, questioning the integrity of the investigations and pointing to a possible conspiracy. Reactions were explosive. While some still believed in Thierry's guilt, many began to doubt the official narrative. Pauline's courage brought a new wave of hope to those who believed in Thierry's innocence. Marie Durand finally found a key witness who could change the course of the case. In a small cafe, she met with a former employee of Antoine who was willing to talk. "And I can't live with this on my conscience anymore," he said nervously. "Antoine paid me to falsify evidence against Thierry." Marie listened intently, recording every detail. This new witness could be the missing piece to dismantle the prosecution. She knew the path would be difficult, but this revelation brought new hope. With the signed statement and collected evidence, Marie was more determined than ever to save Thierry. The gleam of hope in her eyes contrasted with the fatigue of sleepless nights as she prepared for the upcoming legal battle. Inside the prison, the environment became even more hostile for Thierry. One day, while heading to the cafeteria, he was surrounded by a group of inmates. "Look who's here, the great Judge Dupont," one of them mocked. Before Thierry could react, he was brutally attacked. The inmates he had put behind bars now took out all their anger and frustration on him. Thierry tried to protect himself, but the blows were relentless. The feeling of helplessness and injustice consumed him. Each punch was not just a physical assault, but a cruel reminder of how he had been betrayed and unjustly punished. The sound of the blows and Thierry's cries of pain echoed through the prison corridors as he clung to the hope that justice could still prevail. In the foster home, Lucas spent his days in deep sadness. Sitting by the window, he watched the children playing outside but had no desire to join them. The nights were the worst. He cried silently, holding an old teddy bear his father had given him. He felt completely abandoned, the pain of being away from his father and the uncertainty about the future consuming him. Lucas frequently looked at his phone, hoping for a call that never came. The few visits from Marie were his only source of comfort, but even then, he couldn't avoid the overwhelming feeling of loneliness. The lack of answers and constant fear made his days endless and painful. He wondered if he would ever again feel the security and love he had lost. Captain Pierre Dubois was in his office, with evidence and reports spread across his desk. The growing sense of doubt kept him from sleeping. Reviewing the documents again, he began to notice significant flaws, testimonies that didn't align, inconsistent bank records, and a timeline that simply didn't make sense. Dubois frowned, feeling guilt gnawed his previous convictions. "So, how did this pass through other departments without raising questions?" he murmured to himself. He knew something was deeply wrong. Determined to correct the mistake, he decided to investigate further, starting to question those he once believed to be trustworthy. The search for the truth became a personal mission, an internal struggle between his duty and the truth. Pauline Martin continued her tireless investigation. During a long and exhausting night, while reviewing a pile of digital files and legally obtained recordings, she found a video that caught her attention. The video showed a meeting between Antoine and his accomplices, but the audio was distorted and the voices inaudible. Although she couldn't understand what was being said, Pauline realized the video indicated a suspicious relationship between Antoine and other influential individuals. Knowing she had an important clue, Pauline immediately contacted Marie to share the discovery. "Marie, you need to see this. It might not be definitive proof, but it certainly raises more doubts about Thierry's guilt," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Marie watched the video several times, analyzing every detail. "This might be enough to get a review hearing," she said determinedly. They both knew the video wasn't conclusive, but it was an important step in exposing the conspiracy. Marie arranged a visit for Lucas to see his father in prison. On the day of the visit, Lucas was nervous but eager to see Thierry. When he finally entered the visiting room and saw his father, he ran to hug him. "Dad, I missed you so much," Lucas said, tears in his eyes. Thierry hugged his son tightly, feeling a wave of relief and love. "I missed you too, son." "I missed you too," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. That moment brought emotional relief to both Thierry and Lucas. We will overcome this together, Lucas." "I promise," Thierry said. The exchange of looks between them spoke more than 1,000 words. Marie Durand, armed with the new evidence provided by Pauline and Dubois' review, managed to schedule a hearing to review Thierry's case. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was filled with journalists and onlookers, all eager to see the outcome. The tension was palpable. Marie, confident and determined, presented the new evidence to the judge. "Your Honor, this evidence clearly shows my client was the victim of a conspiracy. Although the video is not conclusive, it indicates a suspicious relationship between Antoine and other influential individuals. We ask that all charges against him be reconsidered in light of these new discoveries," she argued. The judge, impressed with the solidity of the new evidence and the flaws found by Dubois, agreed to reassess the case. A sense of hope began to permeate the air. During the hearing, Thierry had the opportunity to speak. He stood, took a deep breath, and with a voice choked with emotion, began to speak. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, I was unjustly accused and imprisoned for a crime I did not commit. The pain of being separated from my son and being publicly humiliated is indescribable. But I am here to fight, not just for myself, but for all who have been victims of a corrupt system." He paused, letting his words echo through the courtroom. "But the truth always finds a way. I thank everyone who believed in me and worked tirelessly to bring the truth to light. I ask not just for justice for myself, but for all who have been wronged by a corrupt system." Many in attendance had tears in their eyes. Lucas, sitting next to Marie, looked at his father with renewed admiration. Thierry's speech touched everyone, reminding them of the importance of fighting for truth and justice. The tension in the air was palpable, but there was also a growing sense that the tide was finally turning in Thierry's favor. Captain Pierre Dubois was increasingly convinced of Thierry Dupont's innocence. Sitting in his office, he reviewed the evidence he had collected, feeling a mix of frustration and determination. Dubois knew that by helping Thierry, he was risking his own career, but the pursuit of truth was more important to him. He looked at the documents scattered on the table, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. How did this go unnoticed, he thought, doubt gnawing at his previous convictions. Finally, he decided to act. In secret, Dubois began gathering additional evidence and investigating the individuals involved in the conspiracy. He knew he needed to be discreet, as any misstep could reveal his intentions and compromise his position. The decision to help Thierry was risky, but Dubois was determined to do the right thing. Pauline Martin continued her relentless search for the truth. One afternoon, she met with a reluctant witness, a former employee of Antoine who had crucial information. "You need to understand, this is a chance to correct a great injustice," Pauline said, her voice full of urgency and sincerity. The witness hesitated, fear evident in his eyes. "And I saw Antoine bribing several people to frame Thierry," he finally said, his voice trembling. "But I'm afraid of what he might do if he finds out I talked." "You are not alone," Pauline assured. "We have a team of people who believe in the truth. Together, we can ensure your safety." Convinced by Pauline's passion and determination, the witness agreed to speak publicly, a step that could turn the tide in Thierry's favor. The decision to testify was difficult, but the promise of protection and justice offered tangible relief. After convincing the witness to speak, Pauline found an anonymous letter on her desk. The envelope, without a sender, bore only her name. Opening it, she found a threatening message. "Stop meddling where you don't belong or you will face the consequences." Pauline felt a chill run down her spine. The threat wouldn't deter her, but it made clear the danger she was facing. With trembling hands, she kept the letter, feeling the pressure mounting. Antoine Leblanc began to realize things were not going as planned. He noticed Julien Lefebvre, his accomplice, was acting strangely. Julien avoided meetings, and his answers became increasingly evasive. Antoine, suspicious, began investigating Julien's loyalty. One night, in a private meeting, Antoine confronted Julien. "Are you hiding something from me?" Antoine asked, his voice cold and threatening. Julien was sweating, feeling the weight of suspicion. "No, Antoine. I'm just worried about how much we are risking," Julien replied, trying to stay calm. However, Antoine was not easily convinced and decided to keep Julien under surveillance. The tension between the two increased, threatening to unravel the conspiracy. Lucas, now with more time alongside his father during prison visits, began to understand the complexity of the situation. During conversations with Thierry, he realized the depth of the injustice his father was facing. "Dad, I know you're innocent, and I want to help," Lucas said firmly. Thierry, moved, patiently explained all the details of the case to Lucas. "The truth will prevail, son, and your strength gives me even more courage to fight," Thierry said, feeling a new vigor seeing Lucas's unconditional support. This understanding and support further strengthened the bond between father and son, fueling Thierry's resilience. Lucas, once confused and scared, now felt a new determination growing within him. Marie Durand, dedicated to proving Thierry's innocence, continued her relentless investigation. One afternoon, while reviewing documents and financial records, she found a crucial clue, a direct link between Antoine and the actual crime Thierry was accused of committing. The record showed a suspicious bank transfer connecting Antoine to one of the main perpetrators of the crime. "This is it," exclaimed Marie, feeling a mix of surprise and relief. With this new evidence, she knew she had an even stronger argument to present in court. The discovery not only strengthened Thierry's case, but also exposed Antoine's true nature. The growing tension indicated the final showdown was approaching. Captain Pierre Dubois, driven by his growing certainty of Thierry's innocence, decided to take more decisive action. One quiet night, he met secretly with Marie Durand in a discreet cafe. With a serious look, Dubois handed her an envelope full of confidential documents. "These are proofs I collected in secret. They show direct connections between Antoine and the real culprits, including Julien Lefebvre," Dubois said, his voice filled with urgency. Marie opened the envelope and saw a series of documents, including bank records and intercepted communications. "This is exactly what we need to strengthen Thierry's defense," Marie replied, her eyes shining with determination. Feeling a wave of hope, she began planning how to use them effectively in court. During a visit to the prison, Marie shared the evidence with Thierry. We have bank records and intercepted communications connecting Antoine and Julien to the real culprits," Marie explained, showing the documents to Thierry. Seeing the evidence, Thierry felt a mix of anger and determination. "So it was Antoine all along and Julien is involved? They will pay for this," he said, clenching his fists. Days before handing the evidence to Marie, Dubois had noticed strange behavior in Julien. During a routine investigation, he saw Julien in a clandestine meeting with Antoine. Observing from a distance, Dubois realized Julien was nervous and avoided direct eye contact with Antoine, suggesting he knew more than he was revealing. This behavior raised suspicions and motivated Dubois to investigate further, leading to the discovery of the evidence. Pauline Martin was preparing an article that would shake the foundations of local society. After weeks of investigation and validation of information, she finally had the necessary material to expose Antoine Leblanc's corruption. Sitting in her office, Pauline typed frantically, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she wrote every detail of her findings. The next morning, her article was published with the title, "Corruption Exposed: The Truth About Antoine Leblanc." In it, Pauline detailed the suspicious transactions, bribes, and manipulations Antoine had conducted to frame Thierry. The article spread quickly, causing an uproar in public opinion and putting Antoine under an unwanted spotlight. Reactions were immediate, with protests and demands for justice growing every hour. Desperate with the new wave of accusations and Pauline's devastating article, Antoine Leblanc decided to act to protect his interests. He began trying to silence witnesses who could testify against him and eliminate any incriminating evidence. Antoine used his contacts to bribe, threaten, and intimidate those who possessed dangerous information. Julien Lefebvre, realizing the increasing tensions, felt more and more insecure. "We need to end this before it's too late," Julien thought, fearing both Antoine and the possibility of being exposed. Antoine, relentless, reinforced his threats to Julien and others involved, heightening the atmosphere of fear and distrust. During prison visits, Lucas began to see the true strength and resilience of his father. Every conversation, every gesture from Thierry showed the unwavering determination of a man fighting for justice. Lucas, who had previously been lost and confused, now saw Thierry as a hero, someone facing adversity with courage and dignity. "Dad, you are a true hero," Lucas said one day, his eyes shining with admiration. Thierry, moved, smiled at his son. "I'm doing this for us, Lucas. And with you by my side, I feel stronger," he replied. This new dynamic brought a deep emotional connection between father and son, fueling the hope that justice would prevail. Determined to expose the truth and turn the tables on Antoine, Thierry began planning a direct confrontation with Julien Lefebvre. During one of Marie's visits, Thierry shared his plan. "Julien is the key. He knows everything and can give us the confession we need," Thierry explained, holding the documents showing Julien's connection to Antoine. Marie, worried but confident in Thierry's determination, agreed to help. "Let's bring him here under the pretext of a plea negotiation," she suggested. Thierry nodded, knowing this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. The tension increased as they planned every detail of the encounter. When Julien was finally brought to the visiting room, he was visibly nervous. Thierry, with a firm voice, began to confront him. "Julien, we have evidence of your connection with Antoine. It's time to tell the truth," Thierry said, looking directly into Julien's eyes. Julien, sweating and visibly shaken, realized he was cornered. The weight of guilt and fear of Antoine's reprisals pressed on him. "If you confess, you might have a chance at redemption," Thierry insisted, the tension in the air almost palpable. Julien knew this was his only chance to escape Antoine's shadow and decided it was time to speak. Antoine Leblanc was growing increasingly paranoid. The news about the investigations and mounting media pressure began to affect him. He hired a private investigator to monitor Thierry and his allies' movements. One night, the investigator brought alarming news. Thierry is planning a direct confrontation with Julien Lefebvre to force him to confess, the investigator reported. Antoine felt a wave of panic. He knew that if Julien confessed, everything would be lost. Determined to sabotage the plan, Antoine began manipulating his influences within the prison. He bribed some guards to ensure Thierry was placed in isolation, making any attempt at communication or action difficult. Meanwhile, Julien Lefebvre was being consumed by guilt. Antoine's constant threats and the pressure of the situation were starting to affect his sanity. Julien spent sleepless nights, reliving his actions and the impact they had on Thierry's life. "How could I do this to him?" Julien thought, as tears of remorse streamed down his face. Gradually, the idea of confessing began to seem the only way to find peace. "Guess if I confess, maybe I can correct some of the wrong I did," Julien thought, trying to muster the courage to do the right thing. He knew that confessing would mean risking his own safety, but the guilt was unbearable. Pauline Martin, determined to uncover the truth, continued her relentless investigation. Her discoveries about Antoine were becoming increasingly dangerous. One night, while returning home, Pauline noticed she was being followed. The tension grew with every step, her heart racing. Suddenly, a car sped towards her. Pauline tried to run but was grazed and fell to the ground, feeling intense pain in her leg. The car quickly fled, leaving her injured and terrified. The police were called, and Pauline was taken to the hospital. While recovering, she knew Antoine was behind the attack. This only proves we're on the right track, she thought, determined to continue despite the fear and pain. Marie Durand, tireless in her quest for the truth, continued reviewing documents and collected evidence. One afternoon, while examining financial records, she found a clue that could change everything. An encrypted email between Antoine and an accomplice detailing the plan to frame Thierry. "This is the proof we need," Marie exclaimed. Feeling a mix of relief and excitement, the evidence was clear and irrefutable. With this new information, Marie knew she could present a strong case in court, exposing the full extent of Antoine's corruption. She immediately contacted Pauline and Dubois, sharing the discovery and preparing for the next step. While all this was happening, Thierry was abruptly removed from his cell and taken to isolation. The small, dark, and cold cell increased the sense of despair and helplessness. Unaware of what was happening outside, Thierry felt more alone than ever. Isolation was part of Antoine's plan to sabotage any attempt by Thierry to communicate with Julien or his allies. Thierry spent his days in silence, trying to maintain his sanity and hope. "They cannot break my will," he thought, despite the growing sense of despair. The courtroom was packed, all eyes on Julien Lefebvre. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, with journalists and onlookers eager to know the case's outcome. Under intense pressure, Julien knew he couldn't delay the truth any longer. He stood up, visibly trembling, and looked directly at the judge. "I can't live with this guilt anymore," Julien began, his voice shaking. "Antoine Leblanc forced me to frame Thierry Dupont. We falsified evidence and bribed witnesses to ensure he was convicted." The room erupted in murmurs and whispers, the shock palpable. The judge called for silence, and Julien continued. "I did it out of fear and greed, but I can't bear the guilt anymore." "Thierry is innocent," Julien's words echoed through the courtroom, and he broke down in tears, completely destroyed by the pressure. As Julien confessed, Antoine Leblanc, who was present in the courtroom, realized his situation was becoming untenable. He discreetly stood up and tried to leave the courtroom unnoticed. However, one of his accomplices, who had been bribed and threatened numerous times, decided it was time to redeem himself. When Antoine was about to leave, his accomplice, a man with a somber and tired look, stood up. "There's more you need to know," he shouted, catching everyone's attention. Antoine stopped, frozen, as the accomplice began revealing even darker secrets. "Antoine not only framed Thierry, but is also involved in influence peddling and money laundering schemes. He threatened my family to force me to cooperate." The revelation shocked the audience even more. Seeing that he had no more escape, Antoine tried to run but was quickly detained by the court security. His desperate attempt to flee only reinforced his guilt in everyone's eyes. With Julien's and Antoine's accomplices' confessions, Thierry's case was quickly reassessed. The judge, now convinced of Thierry's innocence, ordered his immediate release. The community, which had followed the case closely, gathered in front of the courthouse to support Thierry. When Thierry left the courthouse, he was met with applause and cheers. People held up signs and banners with messages of support and justice. Thierry, emotional, looked at the crowd and saw familiar faces, friends, neighbors, and even strangers who believed in his innocence. "Thank you, all of you," Thierry said, tears in his eyes. "Why, without your support, I wouldn't have made it." He was hailed as a hero by the community, and his determination to fight for justice inspired many. Pauline Martin, who had risked her life to uncover the truth, now had all the pieces needed to tell the complete story. She spent the night working frantically on her article, detailing every aspect of the case, from Antoine's conspiracy to Thierry's fight to prove his innocence. The next morning, the article was published with the title, "The Fall of Antoine Leblanc, The Truth Revealed." The response was overwhelming. Pauline received numerous accolades for her brave and tireless work. Her article not only helped clear Thierry's name, but also exposed the deep-rooted corruption, sparking a movement for reform within the judicial system. Captain Pierre Dubois, who had played a crucial role in turning the case around, knew he had one final task to complete. He called a press conference to publicly apologize to Thierry. Standing before the cameras and microphones, Dubois appeared visibly emotional. "I would like to take this opportunity to publicly apologize to Thierry Dupont," Dubois began, his voice firm but laden with emotion. I made a grave mistake in believing the false evidence presented against him. Thierry is an innocent and courageous man, and I deeply regret the suffering he and his family have endured. Thierry, present at the press conference, approached Dubois and extended his hand. Thank you, Captain. I accept your apology, Thierry said, shaking Dubois' hand. The symbolic gesture concluded Dubois' journey of redemption and marked the beginning of a new phase for Thierry and his community. Now more united and vigilant against injustice, Thierry and Lucas, finally reunited, began rebuilding their lives. The relationship between father and son strengthened during the ordeal, and now, together, they face the future with renewed hope. They moved to a new home, away from the shadows of the past where they could start fresh. "We did it, son," Thierry said, his voice filled with emotion as he hugged Lucas tightly. "Yes, Dad. We are stronger now," Lucas replied, with a confident smile and a determined gleam in his eyes. Marie Durand and Pauline Martin received public recognition for their tireless efforts to help Thierry and expose the corruption. In a ceremony at the town hall, both were awarded medals of honor. "You are the true heroines of this story," declared the mayor, applauded by everyone present. Marie and Pauline, emotional, smiled and exchanged a look of mutual understanding, knowing their work had made a real difference. Antoine Leblanc was tried and convicted of his crimes, including falsifying evidence, bribery, and involvement in corruption schemes. The sentence was severe, reflecting the gravity of his actions. "Justice has finally prevailed," the prosecutor said when announcing Antoine's conviction. For Thierry and many others, seeing Antoine behind bars was a powerful symbol that truth can triumph over injustice. The murmurs of approval among the public in the courtroom made it clear the community felt the same. Captain Pierre Dubois, motivated by his experience with Thierry's case, began implementing significant reforms within the police department. He introduced new investigation protocols, ethics and transparency training, and a hotline for reporting corruption. "We cannot allow mistakes like this to happen again," Dubois stated in a press conference. His determination to reform the police system ensured future cases would be handled with greater integrity, and the positive response from the community showed his effort was appreciated. Thierry, now free and with his name cleared, reflected on his journey. He acknowledged the importance of the support he received and decided he could not remain silent in the face of injustice. "This experience showed me we must fight against corruption and protect the innocent," Thierry declared in an interview. With the community by his side, he committed to using his voice and experience to promote justice. His determination was clear, and his words resonated deeply with those who listened. To symbolize his redemption and acceptance by society, Thierry was invited to speak as the keynote speaker at a public event on justice and human rights. Standing on stage before a large audience, Thierry felt a wave of relief and accomplishment. "I am honored to be here today, and I promise to continue fighting for a fairer system for all," he said, receiving a standing ovation. The warmth of the applause and the smiling faces in the crowd reinforced his determination and gave him the certainty he was on the right path.